Okay. Yeah, so in the meantime, I'll just go ahead and start. So welcome very much to my talk, Demystifying RxJS Operators. Here in the lovely Birmingham, it was, right?
Yes, Birmingham,
yeah.
UK.
So those of you who never saw a talk of me, this is a meetup, if I remember correctly, and it's kind of common law that the speaker on a meetup has to drink something. So cheers.
Cheers.
People on the internet could think that I have an alcohol problem, but I'm working on it. I'm serious, not serious. Okay, so demystifying RxJS operators. So how came I up with the talk, and what do you can you expect from it? As soon as my clicker is working, maybe now it is working. Okay, so my whole point is that pretty much everyone already uses operators and is fairly does kind of know how to apply them, but it's barely known how they work under the hood. And to apply them properly, it's good to have some common knowledge about that. Therefore, some of the things that I talk about are internal APIs. So I don't want you to rely on every nitty-gritty detail, but this is the latest version of RxJS. So it's at least not going to change for 7 as far as I know. It might change with version 8, but we'll see. So I hope after the talk that you have a better understanding of operators in general and therefore can more sophisticately apply operators in your daily routine using RxJS. To work with that, we need to have a common knowledge what an operator actually is. And me as a professional, my first go-to website is Wikipedia. So when I look for operator, it was more a mathematical description, but it's generally a mapping that acts on an element of a space to produce elements of another space. And if we think of operators like map, this makes kind of sense, right? It's map one thing to something else. So that makes sense and we can comprehend it. Before we dive much deeper into the whole topic, 2 more words about me. My name is Jan-Niklas Wortmann. I'm living in Germany. I'm 25 years old. I'm a self-employed front-end consultant, so I'm doing a lot of architecturing and designing of front-end application, but also coding some bit. And since mid of 2018, I think, something like that, I'm a member of the RxJS Core Team, mainly responsible for the docs itself. So if you have any questions about RxJS or something like that, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at any point of time. I'm very happy to help about that. So, yeah, I already added that disclaimer. I already talked about that disclaimer. Just again, heavy implementation details partly sometimes. So be aware when you want to rely on some of those, maybe. Okay, what is an operator? So if we take a, okay, I'm hiding actually something that's bad. That's not bad. Oh, that's bad. Okay, doesn't really matter. So if we take a look at the interfaces that RxJS defines for operators, we have first the unary function, which is just a very basic definition of a function that takes a source argument and returns some value. This is very general and doesn't mean a lot. What's actually interesting is the operator function. And the operator function is such a unary function just with observables. So it's taking an observable source and returning a new observable. That is what an operator is. There's a special type mono, inverted camera, there's a special type mono type operator function that has the same input type as output type. So if we think about filter, for example, the type of the output observable is not changed by that. So it's a monotype operator function. So much about the general interfaces. That's a little bit easy, right? So let's more talk about the definition itself. And from a definition point of view, well, from my point of view, especially because there is no clear definition what is an RxJS operator. From my point of view, an operator needs to be first composable and second need to add behavior. So what does that mean? Map, for example, is a very good example for a common operator. So it's taking an observable, applies a projection function to it, and it returns a new observable. This is how map works. why from, for example, is not an operator, because it's not really composable. You can't apply it to an already existing observable. This is a static creation function. This is a term you might find sometimes in the docs. Sometimes it's also labeled as creation operator and something like that. It's not really consistent in the docs. It's kind of my bad. But therefore from cannot really be considered an operator. Same goes kind of for multicast. So for those of you who are not aware of the multicast operator, it's actually creating a subject under the hood that is subscribing to the source observable, and therefore you can multicast the value to all subscribers. The thing is, and as you can see here, no, you can't see it here. Sorry. As you can see here, it's not returning an observable, it's returning a connectable observable. Therefore, you have to call connect on the returned observable to make the subject instance under the hood subscribe to the source observable. The common flaw with that is that you can't apply other operators afterwards, because you can't apply operators to connectable observables. You can't just apply them to observables. And the thing is, it's actually a little bit tricky, because there's also another overloaded method signature where you can specify this selector, and then it's returning an observed value, which is an observable. I didn't have space for the typings, but an observed value of is an observable pretty much. So therefore, multicast might be an operator, might be not. This is the thing where we improve the typings in general. So, but right now, multicast might be an operator if it's returning observable. If not, it's not composable and therefore not an operator. I think this is kind of clear. What's important for an operator is that it handles has six responsibilities. First, it needs to handle next, error, and complete emissions. This is what our operators need to do, and even though they might not treat error or complete, they at least need to forward it. So if we think about map again, map just handles the next emission, but also forwards error and complete, so that you still get notified about those signals. Additionally, it needs to handle subscription, because every operator is just getting applied as soon as you subscribe to an operator. And it also, in some ways, sometimes needs to handle unsubscription. So think about operators where you have inner observable. Switch map, for example. Switch map is internally subscribing to the inner observable. Therefore, in case of an unsubscription, this operator needs to make sure that the inner observable is unsubscribed as well. And what is very important is that an operator returns a new observable. This is very important, so that you don't run into major issues with call by reference. Yes, these are the main responsibilities. And with version RxJS 5.5, I think, we introduced the pipe architecture. I don't know who of you used RxJS before that. Before that, you could, and you still can, write RxJS code like here on the right side. Again, just to repeat, an operator function is just a function applying an observable, taking a source observable as parameter and returning a new observable. Therefore, we can write our code like this, where the outer operator and then taking the source as the next one, again, source argument next one. This is valid RxJS code. No one is able to read that and understand that, me neither, and I'm not even able to properly explain it. But this is valid RxJS code. And it's pretty much, no, it's entirely the same as on the right, what we did with the pipe architecture. Before that, we had prototype packaging. I will talk about that in a second as well. But why did we add this pipe architecture? So the pipe method in general is, with some minor performance improvement, this is what we have in the RxJS source code, or in the code base itself. It's just a reduce statement that is applied over all the operators passed to the pipe function, which ensures that the return value of the first operator is passed to the next one. Otherwise, you would need to invert the calls, right? So this is pretty much all it does. And there are pipe methods in other frameworks, other libraries as well. They are acting very similar. We just have here a special pipe method to ensure our typings that we need for RxJS. Oof. Okay. What is the benefit of that? So I also kind of spoiled about that. So the main thing why we introduced that were the argument of tree shakeability. I'm still not sure if tree shakeability is a proper English word, but also me as non-native speaker don't need to care that much about it. So I will just use it and establish it. So it's tree shakeability. Because before that, we had prototype patching. So every time you imported an operator, let's talk about map, for example, it patched the map function method, to be precise, on the observable prototype, and afterwards, after you import, you could use that. The thing is, if you're not using that map function, but still have imported it, common tools like Webpack and etc. were not able to figure that out and tree shake that away. Therefore, now, if you import an operator but not use it, Webpack will be smart and figure it out and remove that from the bundle. That was the first argument. The second argument why the POP architecture is good is the point of readability. And this is what I already have shown, whatever. Grammar is also difficult, not just tree shakeability, but grammar is also a difficult point. So the point about readability is if we would have or just use the typings as they are right now, we would need to invert all those method calls, and no one is able to understand that or write that at all. And the last benefit is extensibility, because before RxJS 5.5, it was fairly more complicated to add custom operators. And with the pipe architecture, because this is it's still just a function taking source argument and returning a new observable, this is manageable. We can, I don't want to say easily, but we are at least able to add new operators. I want to talk about this statement a little bit more in detail, because there's some kind of gotcha in there. So every operator returns a new observable, right? That's what the typing says. We saw that in the operator function, it returns a new observable. So if this is the case, we could actually write the code that we have like here, where we, for example, in the switch map statement, pass a subject instance and returning a subject instance, or also in the take until and just pass a subject instance. We could write it the same without the observable and just pass a subject in there, and then it will still return an observable. That's what the typings are saying, at least. And I promise you, this is working. This is completely working. The problem is that not every operator returns an observable, apparently. So if we take a look at this, if we apply operators to a subject, even though the typings will say you get an observable, so you can't call next on it, but I promise you, it's still at runtime a subject. To be precise, it's an anonymous subject, which is like an internal base class below subject. But if you apply an operator on that subject, you will get a subject instance out of it, even though TypeScript will think, wait, this is an observable. And this is a big problem right now, from my point of view. And this is kind of weird. Why don't we as RxJS Core Team just fix the typings for that, right? I need to talk a little bit about the lift architecture. And this is pretty much what I would consider internal implementation details. And it's also subject to change. We just initiated a new discussion about it. But back to the original topic. So the lift architecture consists out of 3 points. So we have first a lift method that we call on our source observable. To that lift method, we pass an operator class. And in that operator class, we usually use an operator subscriber. Sounds kind of weird. It is kind of weird, but let's take a look. So to explain this architecture itself, I will just take a deep dive into the implementation of map, because map is a known operator most of the time, and it's fairly easy to comprehend. So for those of you who are not aware of map, it's taking a function that is applied to every single value emitted by the observable, and it's returning a new value. So you can manipulate the values in your observable. This is what map is designed for. So if we take a look at the source code here, we see that we take the source observable, call lift method, lift on it, whatever lift is, and pass a new operator instance to that, where we pass our projection function and the this argument, but we can ignore the this argument because technically you can specify the this scope with that. But this is not really subject of this talk. So interesting is the creation of the new map operator instance and passing the project function, and also source lift for sure. So this is what we talk about more now. Source lift, if we take a look in the observable TS file inside the RxJS code base, I'm pretty sure this is the entire code of observable lift. And this takes an operator and returns an observable. And we see here that in the first line, it says, okay, new observable. This is ensuring that every operator that implements this lift method or that behaves with that lift method will always return a new observable. Because if we remember, we return source lift. This is what we're returning. So we're returning new observable. Additionally, we are specifying those two metadata, source and operators. And those are very important. Those are actually both used when we subscribe to that. Because with the subscribe method, then it can say, okay, please take a look at the operator, execute it. Please take a look, go to the source, execute the operator, and pass that to the next one. This is how subscribe is implemented. So this statement is very important to specify this metadata so that we can ensure that the operator is called within the subscribe method. Otherwise, it could happen if we wouldn't do it like this, that our observable is not lazy anymore, right? Because if we would execute that operator instantly, that is not what we're expecting when we're dealing with RxJS. With RxJS, we are at first expecting every operator is called lazily. Means as soon as I subscribe, logic is triggered, not before that. So let's take a look at the operator class. And it's kind of interesting that RxJS uses all those interface implementation, but the RxJS code base is actually designed to provide reactive programming for JavaScript interfaces, but it's so it's fairly functional when you use it, but the code base is so ridiculous object-oriented. It's really weird. I did not expect it the first time I looked in the code base, but so we specify this interface operator that just needs to implement a call method, and this call method is actually called inside the subscribe method by taking a look at this operator metadata property. And as we see here that in that call method, we pass a subscriber and return a tear down logic. Tear down logic is usually also what is implemented when you, I don't know if you ever created a new observable instance on your own with new observable. There you have to specify a subscriber class and you can return a tear down logic. This is the same. So let's take a look at the map operator implementation. So it implements operator, therefore it has to implement that call method. And so we are taking the subscriber because we remember we're getting a subscriber from the, it's in the observable subscribe, then we pass that through. And in that subscribe, we say, okay, please, or in that call method, sorry, we say source subscribe, and we create a new map subscriber. And this map subscriber is just, if we take a look at it, implementing or extending the subscriber interface. It's a class, I'm sorry. So this subscriber class, I'm sorry if that is a little bit large. So that subscriber class just ensures that next error complete are at least bypassed. That's what I said before. So if you're just having a plain operator does nothing, you still need to ensure that the emissions are passed through. Otherwise, if you would not pass through complete, for example, your observable would never complete anymore. And you will be like, what is happening here? So this is ensuring by extending the subscriber class. And what our map subscriber is now doing, and I'm pretty sure this is the entire implementation within RxJS of this map subscriber. It's just implementing underscore next. This is the part that needs to be overwritten. And in that underscore next, we are taking the value from the next emission. So for example, we're having an interval observable. So we first emit 0, then 1, then 2, then 3 in some certain interval. So the first value comes in with 0. This is our value. And then we apply the projection function. We do this inside this try catch block to ensure that, because you as an API user from RxJS can pass a function in that map function. And if your map function, for whatever reason, throws an error, for example, you're calling something on an undefined expression, or you're just throwing an error, something like that, this try catch block will ensure that we end up in the catch block and forwarding that error that happens inside that custom function. A little bit tricky, but therefore this try catch block. And anyway, what it's happening inside the map, and the main logic inside the map is happening inside that map subscriber. We're just taking the value that's coming from the observables, from the source observable. It's subscribing actually to that source observable, taking the value, applying the projection function, and forwards it, whoever takes it. This is how observables are implemented under the hood and how operators are implemented under the hood. Yes, I just saw that, taught that. So back to our original problem. Why is now, if we call an operator, still returning a subject? Even though we just saw observable lift returns always new observable. Well, the thing is, this is the implementation of observable lift. There's also a subject lift, and the subject lift, and here we see it, creates a new anonymous subject and returns in this subject instance. So even though the typings will say, okay, this is an observable, at runtime, it's going to be a subject. The reason why this is the case for subject, I don't know. But this is currently discussed. Ben, I think, created last week an issue, and we will discuss that again, because this is the problem for subject, and this is also the problem with connectable observable, and this is just weird behavior that one might not expect. In general, it is bad practice to apply operators directly to subjects. What you want is call subject as observable and then apply the operators. But technically, from the typings, you're completely entitled to do that. So it is my wish that we change this. But what are the benefits of the lift architecture? Why do we have this piece of code in place? And it's fairly complex, to be honest. Quick interruption, actually, not really part of this talk, but there's a amazing talk of Paul Taylor, who used to be core member of the RxJS, and we are still actively talking to him about some of the design principles and stuff like that, who did an amazing talk at, I think it was ReactConf 2015, something like that, about the design principles and changes of RxJS 5. It's so deep dive. It's such a smart guy. I can highly recommend it. I unfortunately don't know the exact talk title, but if you will search for RxJS 5 Paul Taylor, you will probably find it. Okay, back to lift architecture. There are two benefits. The first one is performance, and the second one is customizable. So performance is not anymore a huge deal, because this was performance optimized for the way the V8 engine was at that point of time. We could probably, with current browsers and stuff like that, achieve a similar performance. But compared to the way RxJS 4 was designed, and I've never seen it, I'll take a look at the code base of RxJS 4, and I promise you I won't ever do this. It's claimed to be more performant than it used to be. But what is meant with customizable? So the thing is, this lift architecture provides a very neat benefit. If you think of creating a custom browser extension, for example, to debug RxJS operators, this is your go-to point, because it allows you to check how every single operator is behaving, how it's operating. Yes, that is good English, how an operator is operating. I am so smart. Oh gosh. So I actually took this example of the out of the RxJS code base. We have this log observable in some kind of testing method. So what you could do with this lift method is providing a custom observable type for your own needs. So you could create such a log observable, which takes a log or creates, no, sorry. It instantiates a new log operator where you pass your operators to. And if we take a quick look into our log operator, we will see that we create a log subscriber, as we already saw that before, and we get out this child operator constructor name. By doing this and by implementing such a log subscriber where we log all the emissions that happen, we end up with something like that, where we apply several operators to our log observable, and we will see how each and single operator is behaving when the next is emitted, when error would be emitted, when complete is emitted, and also in what, how's the order of those operator. Don't be confused by this do operator here. Actually, tab used to be called do before RxJS 5, and therefore the operator class is still called do because we are lazy. Just the operator itself is called tab, but the implementation details under the hood are still called do. Yes, so this is one of the scenarios where you could use that lift architecture for. Or if you want to create a custom browser extension to show marble diagrams according to the flow of your observables, this is your go-to point. And this is also the reason why we will probably, very likely, keep that lift architecture, just change it to not have these flaws with subject, multicasted, observable, and stuff like that. Yes. By talking about operators, I also roughly want to talk about operator or custom operators. This is pretty much all we have about operator architecture under the hood. But custom operator are still an interesting topic from my point of view. And in general, there are two different kind of custom operators. We have convenient operators and greenfield operators. So let's first take a look at the convenient one. So we're pretty much used to doing stuff like that, right? So for constant values, we're creating constants, right? We're also doing stuff like that where we have some complicated logic, and therefore we wrap it in a function to make it more accessible, to give that all of that a name, right? Unfortunately, many people tend to use anonymous function for callbacks heavily. So if you have such a reduce statement, for example, within some seconds, no one is able to understand that code. It's just too complex. We need some time to process it. And the same goes for RxJS code, apparently. And this is actually a piece of code that I wrote, and it's still running in production. So I can blame myself here. But honestly, this would cause, at least when I saw it after like 2 weeks ago, this was my reaction. And it would be way better to apply the same methods that we are already used to by just giving those things a proper name. And actually, RxJS under the hood is already doing that. So for example, we have the start with operator, which is just a convenient use of concat. Also, we have concat map, which is a convenient use of merge map. We have share, which is a combination of multicast and ref count. And you can do this completely yourself. So if you have like proper piece of logic that you use over and over again, like for example, you could easily create an observable a filter operator that filters out all null values. Or you could implement a safe get method so that no one or that everyone use switch map for get operations, and for everything else, not switch map, because it's probably wrong. So what it's just doing, again, an operator function is just a function taking a source observable and returning a new observable, right? So in this term, it's not a new, it is kind of new observable because we're applying switch map here. But also TypeScript is not checking if it's a new instance or not. But with this code, it is way more readable. Oh, sorry. It is way more readable if someone will read like, okay, save get and performs a HTTP request there, then we can assume what's happening. This is more readable and more comprehensible, and it's also more error prone because it's also catching errors on the inner observable. Again, this is already a fairly complex example. We could use that again for filtering out null values, or also to group operators that we use commonly in the same order, something like that. And actually, just to go quickly back, for this piece of code, this would be so great. Okay, and I like that GIF. So, okay, let's talk about greenfield operators. And honestly, if you need to implement an operator on your own, I would be super curious to see what you're actually doing. Because there are, I think, like roughly, if we stick to the definition that I did before, we have roughly 100 different operators, more or less. So I would be very impatient to see what you are doing there, and that you need. I can't believe that there's no operator for that. But if you really say, okay, I want to do this crazy behavior, like for example, switch scan, and there's actually already a running pull request for switch scan, even though no one will ever use that. You could create an operator on their own, and I can not recommend you enough to watch this talk that is linked here from Ben Lesh and Tracy from last year's NGConf, I think. And there, especially Ben is talking very in deep what you have to do to create an operator completely on your own, with sticking with this Lyft architecture and everything, all the common flaws that you could run into, how to test them, and so on and so forth. And I will never be able to do it better than Ben, so I'm just linking it here. Check that out. Here's a link to the slides and a QR code in case you want to scan it. I can quickly also, just a second. I can also quickly put it in the chat. Here we go. I hope it's still valid. If not, just let me know. And then I'm very happy to do this talk. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to answer any kind of question about RxJS. And I hope that was at least interesting for you. I'm well aware that this is not directly applying for many of you, that you can't directly use that for your business project. But I hope that it at least helped you understanding how RxJS is structured. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that was quite I would say a deep dive.
Sure.
But yeah, I've kind of seen, or at least I had some, especially with NGRX data, I sometimes kind of, I had to create a new custom, kind of wrapping some logic in a function.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a bit tricky from what I remember with the types to return back the type that was, it was losing the types, and I struggled a bit with that. Yeah. And in the end, I didn't do it. I just left it because it was taking too long.
Fair. Typings, if you do them properly, they can take a lot of resources. It's insane.
Yeah. Have you created any kind of custom stuff like this in own projects?
So right now, and I'm kind of a slacker because I should already have released it, but I'm working on a RxJS web library that wraps web APIs in Observable, and those are mainly those kind of second or like custom operators, because most of the web APIs are actually promise based. So what it's just doing is like calling defer and from promise and returning that most of the time. Some of them are callback based, and then it's a little bit tricky. Also, sensor API was super tricky. but this is one of the places where I used custom operators. The other one was actually where we had a polling mechanism implemented within our business app. This was actually really a business app. And this was fairly complex. So if you do polling properly, it's more challenging than one might thought in the beginning. And because it took a lot of time to process this already, then I wrapped this in a custom operator where I could also apply marble testing pattern to properly test how this operator is behaving. Because there were also before bugs in there. Yes, so, but besides that, I honestly should more often do this kind of alias operators where I just give that a proper name to make it more readable. I do this on my own. As you saw, I showed you my code. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we once had to do like kind of retry, failed retry, and yeah, I spent weeks
Yeah,
get it right. Yeah.
It sounds easy in the beginning, but it's actually fairly complex if you do this thought through and properly throughout your whole business application.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be kind of configurable as well, because in some cases we wanted to kind of retry like 3 times, in other cases 5 times, in other cases show a message and then try again, and yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and you do it once, and then 6 months later you have to do it again, or then yeah, it's like oh. Yeah. Cool.
True.
Let's see if we have any questions. So need a share replay with cache timeout. So Lee, if you want to talk, we can mute.
How you doing, guys? Great talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd be interested in seeing somebody implement, I've seen something that Ben posted, but yeah, is a share replay with a cache timeout so that it caches for a specific duration, and then obviously if that expires, that it'll sort of fresh the original observable.
Yeah, so my first approach would be checking RxJS-etc. It's by Nicholas Jameson, and he has a shitload of additional operators for whatever reason. I could imagine something like that to be in there. My next approach would actually be a custom operator, because this is not within the RxJS code base. And share replay is definitely not supporting that. You could probably implement it within publish replay. Right. But it's definitely not easy. So yeah, you could, publish replay could actually work. Because for publish replay, you can pass a replay subject. And with cache time, what you mean, like cache invalidation, right? Where you say like after a fixed amount of time, please invalidate the cache, right?
Yeah, and then the next, yeah, and then at some future point, if that's like, I don't know, like a combined latest or what have you, then if that expiration had taken place, it would re-invoke the original observable, or some delegate that would create the original observable.
You're crazy.
But I'm just thinking about like caching lookups, but you don't want to cache them indefinitely on the client. I want to cache them for like 10 minutes.
I see where you're coming from.
So share replay, yeah, that's a tick in the box, but I don't want share replay for the rest of the client's life. That's going to be.
I think you can implement it with still a decent effort, but probably with how's it called? Publish replay.
Okay. I'm looking at your man's Git repo for his RJX etc. So
yes. If not, or if you struggle with this or need help or advice or something like that, reach out to me on Twitter at any time. I'm happy to help. It sounds definitely like an interesting challenge. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I've seen Ben tweet, try and answer it in a tweet response, but it's as many questions as it is answers. But it would definitely for me be very useful. Share replay is is brilliant, but yeah, you know, if it's the like of lookups on a, you know, quite a large form, then
yeah,
they're cached for the duration of the client, or you don't cache them at all, and then
to be depending on your needs. Actually, I'm a super huge fan of service worker,
right.
because then you don't need to have these kind of difference, like, okay, do I need now to load something from a cache or not? Depending on your needs. And
that's why I just want to lose that detail in an operator.
You should. Oh, Jesus Christ! There's so many edge cases. You should definitely wrap that in an operator and test that through with marble testing. Jesus Christ, I can.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Cool. Any more questions? Anybody? If there's somebody new to RxJS, because I remember when I started, when Angular 2 was in alpha or whatever, 2016, that was kind of the first thing I faced like a struggle, especially at that time. It was difficult to find the resources, and it was mainly talks because the documentation, it wasn't.
What?
You joined in 2018, so yeah, that was probably 2016 or around that time. So yeah, and yeah, it was a bit of a struggle. So now, because there's so many, you know, pages, even the documentation and stuff, what would you kind of recommend to the go-to place would be, you know, to if you're starting with RxJS?
So that's a good question. So honestly, I would wait for the next major release, because I plan some major restructuring within the documentation, and then my first go-to point would be this, because I created a differentiation between beginners and advanced topics. So just an easy example, when you start with RxJS, you don't need to know about higher order observables. Right now, the way the documents are structured, there's one document of operators that covers multicasting operators, higher order operators, and in the beginning, you're completely overwhelmed by that. So I hope to release this with the next major version, and then from my point of view, it will be way more flawless. It's also a little bit difficult because the topic itself is fairly difficult. But it's still, at least the experience to learn the basic concepts should be more flawless. There are different resources as well that are pretty good. So they're on Angular Nation. For those of you who know that platform, there's a free RxJS course for Angular developers made by a good developer from the RxJS Core Team. So this covers at least the basics. What is an observable? What is an operator? Why do you need to subscribe? What are the most important operators you need to know? But it's really basic. There's Learn RxJS and Reactive How. Those are the other two resources that I usually recommend. Learn RxJS is very use case driven. So I have this operator, what can I do with it? And Reactive How is showing you an operator with the most amazing animation I've ever seen so far. So for this, you already need to know, okay, I don't know, what is the difference between take while and take until? And then you have like animations showing you the difference and just elaborate it to you. So depending on your need, I would recommend these resources. There are amazing blog posts in the meantime. Sorry, there's a Dev2 RxJS organization. Jan-Niklas Jameson is actively blogging. On Angular in-depth, there are a lot of good RxJS blog posts in the meantime. Yeah, so, and also there are a lot of good talks out there, especially by Ben. Some of the good talks are by me, without promoting myself again. Yeah, so those are kind of good resources. Also, I fairly often talk about RxJS on Twitch, so this is also maybe a good point to see what I'm doing there. Yeah, but it's honestly, and this is definitely one thing I want to improve by taking more care of the docs. The the process of learning RxJS is super difficult right now. We have a lot of good documentation for very advanced users of RxJS by having good documentation about certain operators. That doesn't help you if you have no clue about RxJS in general. So this is definitely a thing I want to improve. So I have several things on the to-do list for that, especially for the docs, like creating a kind of tour of heroes like for RxJS. This would be great to just give you a brief introduction into it. Also, what I would really like to have is some kind of recipes. Yes. So I want to do polling. How could I do this with RxJS? And then you have like 3 different implementation. Pick A, B, C. Those are all kind of stuff that would really help. And also the documentation itself should be just way more better from time to time.
And testing, are you going to include some testing tips in there as well?
We have 2, I think. So the thing is, in terms of testing right now, we just have 1 document about Marble testing. And honestly, I barely use Marble testing because it's way too complicated and not really useful for business applications. It's good if you want to test certain operators and their special behavior and their internal behavior especially. It's not really useful for business applications. So therefore, I'm still on the fence if this is something we want to add, because it's also kind of testing library specific. And it's not super RxJS specific.
So how do you test then? Do you just kind of subscribe, or?
Usually in like 99% of the cases, I just subscribe to that observable and check if the return or the emitted value is the expected value. This just works great if you just have 1 emission, for example. This also this works very easy because in case it's synchronous. If it's asynchronous, you can, at least in Jasmine, specify that done callback. That's usually what I do. You could also leverage Zone.js for that. But this is what I usually do, like subscribing to the observable and check the value. There are also patterns when you say like, okay, I expect the observable to complete afterwards. You can work around those things. And in most of the cases when we work inside Angular application with observables, we most of the time have those scenarios where we say like, okay, I expect that this performs an HTTP request and then it returns an observable of this value. So this is usually my go-to approach.
Cool.
But actually, I really need to check out the thing Chai did for, I again forget, expect observable or however that called. What's called?
Observable spy? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that looks fairly interesting. And I heard of it before, but I never used it. I definitely need to check that out.
Yeah, so for those of you who weren't here at the beginning, Shai Resnick just tweeted about this library that he created to help, he says, easier testing and observables, which is called Observable Spy. I didn't have a chance to look at it because it was just like 1 or 2 hours ago. Yeah. Cool. Another question.
Yes.
How would you recommend to handle conditionals? So, sometimes you say like, I've got a request and then I have a null or an array of something or an empty array, and I want to do 3 different things. How would you, kind of handle this with RxJS?
So it definitely adds certain complexity to your observable, especially if the return type changes. Because to work properly afterwards, then you should like add guard functions. So like, okay, if it's of kind of that type, then do this with that. If it is of type that, then do this. What I usually do is 2 different approaches, to be fair. So either I have a scenario where I want to say like, okay, I still have the same source observable, and then it performs something conditionally, like saying, okay, either it performs this or that, right? then usually in the cases that I had, it ends up with something like switch map, merge map, concat map, exhaust map, where you say like, okay, if the user is online, perform the HTTP request, otherwise load something from the cache, return an empty observable, whatever. This is one approach, like just having a ternary if, and the typings of RxJS are handling that properly. And this is handled properly, but in general, those kind of typings are getting improved with the next major version. The other approach, for example, which is also some kind of conditional, would be like, imagine something like keyboard shortcuts, where you say like, okay, I want to, in case some key A is pressed and I want to, or left arrow is pressed, I want to go to the previous page. In case right arrow is clicked, I want to go to the next page. In that case, I would do, I can quickly show it. So what? Here we go. Stack blitz. RxJS. I'm increasing the font size. So what I use or would do for that approach would be leveraging from event. I don't need this, and merge, and here I need tab and share and filter. So what I would do is first create like a source observable saying like const keyboard events. Keyboard events, where I would say like from event document key down. And because I want to subscribe multiple times to it, I would create use the share operator. So we have that in a concept. What I would then do is like, okay, left arrow, saying like, okay, please use a keyboard event and then take filter. And I think it's like event, and then unfortunately from event is not 100% properly typed. So I will just cast it to keyboard event. And I think it's like key A or event dot key code. I'm not entirely sure, but this doesn't really matter, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
And I would do the same for. Sorry, that red squiggly line is disturbing me. Okay, and I would do something similar for right arrow. And this is why we needed the share operator, because by having two observables that uses the keyboard event, we would, if we would subscribe twice to that, we would create two event listeners, which are not really needed for if we just subscribe to the key down events, right? Mm-hmm. So then I would say, also what I would then say is like, sorry, I missed the important part actually, is having the tab operator here, or something else, what you want to do in case this operator is, this key is pressed. Right, this can mean, in the scenario I pictured, it would be like, go to the previous page. And I would have a similar thing for this one. And then I would just say like, okay, merge, subscribe please to right arrow and left arrow. Just to have one subscription on them. I don't really care about the subscription itself, and I don't do anything within that, because all I want to do for those single observables are handled within the tab operator then. So this is the other pattern that I use, and this is actually one I used already. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You know, with Angular, like especially with the forms, because there's loads of events, the things and happening, and do you tend to use much of Rx with that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Or yeah.
So yeah, actually reactive forms within the Angular ecosystem, the one very topic that triggers me completely, because they're so bad. Jesus Christ. Sorry. The main thing that make me trigger about it is just the fact that it's called reactive form because it's barely reactive. Just providing a value change observable and status change observable doesn't make something reactive. Okay, I'm done with raging now. Yes, but actually forms, and especially form controls in general, are a very good scenario for RxJS because it's at least event driven. So if you imagine just like you want to have an accessible select box, a custom select box, you have to support tab navigation, you have to support keyboard navigation, you have to support escape keys, you have to support end and up and whatever. So there are a lot of events that you need to handle and manage. And for those scenarios, RxJS is perfect. Honestly, without being biased at all, there's nothing better for handling events than RxJS.
Yeah.
So this is also the reason why I use reactive forms, even though I think they should be better, because you can still use them very good with RxJS. I'm missing a lot of features, don't get me wrong, and I still hate them. But yeah, also, this is actually, especially if you're coming from Angular and you want to dive deeper into RxJS, I would definitely recommend you using reactive forms just to dive deeper into that, play a little bit around with it, see how things behave, build some things, type ahead search, polling, whatever, just to get a better feeling of that. And reactive forms are kind of good for that purpose. I never said that.
Yeah, I was just looking recently to, is it Nathaniel? Yeah, I'm gonna butcher his name now.
Nathaniel Basil, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's got some interesting. One is like a forms manager.
I took a look at the implementation because it's type safe, and I was already very happy about that. And Nathaniel Basil is extremely brilliant, super smart-minded. And I definitely want to check it out. So if you want to do a talk about that, just let me know. I'm definitely going to attend.
Cool. And then I think he just released another stuff for reactive forms. I can't remember. Yeah, it was a tweet today from him.
Yeah, he released something about error handling, but I didn't take a look into
error
that.
handling, yes. Yeah, reactive forms, error handling, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of cool stuff coming from the community. And I think I saw another tweet from the Angular team. I can't remember if it was Kara or somebody else that said they're gonna look into the forms to make it more type safety and do a better job. Hopefully, with the version 10, we might get that.
I highly doubt that because version 10 is already in release candidate, if I remember correctly. But the reactive forms need some kind of love, actually. And they were a little bit of an abandoned child for 5 years now.
Yeah, well, I think Ivy was on the main on the radar for long. So now that's kind of
there are always trade-offs in project development.
Yeah.
I'm happy that they now take care of that.
Cool. Any other questions? If not, we are gonna end the recording here and we can then continue talking. But if there's no more questions, right, it looks like no. So thank you very much for this talk. It's definitely interesting and quite deep dive.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I had a lot of fun. I don't know about you, but I had a lot of fun, so it was worth it.
Yeah, me too. And I hope the guys here as well. They got some answers, hopefully. If you have any other questions, I suppose they can tweet you or email you as well.
Anytime.
Cool. Thank you very much. I am going to stop the recording now.